Right, over to you.
Right, well, thank you for inviting me to speak to the association. I sometimes feel slightly that I'm suffering from imposter syndrome and here under false pretenses because I'm not a Romanist in the slightest. I'm an early medievalist, mostly by training, but I would have to confess that when I first started in archaeology back in the 70s, I did spend some time working with the late Graham Webster, digging Roman villas in the Cotswolds. And as will be seen in the course of this talk, I have done a tiny bit of Roman stuff since then. Also, when I was invited to give the speech, I said I wasn't certain if I could do enough on Roman roads, so we produced a more general title on a review of the Romans in southwest Scotland. Having put it together, I now discover I've actually got an awful lot on Roman roads, and the talk will therefore be a combination of both the Roman road system in the southwest and recent developments. Our starting point is this old map, reproduced countless times, which is in itself horrendously misleading. For instance, Ward Law down there is not a fort. Why on earth the Roman road is crossing down there is beyond me. The lack of anything Roman out here is, quite frankly, deeply disturbing. And none of the east-west routes are shown either. So I think we've moved somewhat beyond this. Even 14, 15 years ago, we were still limited to a very similar thing. Here you can see the Roman road coming up Annandale, crossing over to Nithsdale, one link to Eskdale, and sort of hints of a Roman route heading out westwards across the region. But and this shows the entirety in 2009, the entirety of known Roman sites and material within the region. We are, of course, beyond the wall. These days, it's become a little better. We now have more indications of Roman routes, and we have more recent finds that are enabling us to pad out some of it, but we've still got some glaring gaps in places. It's not helped, of course, by the Ordnance Survey, as I'm assured members of the Society know. It can be most misleading. Here you can see part of the Roman road up Annandale. The current road, there's a 19th century dogleg to get over the West Coast main line, and the Roman road is seen merrily heading off in a north-northwesterly direction. But actually, when you see it on the crop marks, here is the dogleg over the railway, and in fact the road can be seen to be continuing quite merrily on its way, not tracking out where the Ordnance Survey have it at all. This is a lower Annandale that, for those of you who are unfamiliar with geography in the area, or those of you from abroad, the thick black line there marks the current boundary between Scotland and England. It is, of course, a historical creation from the later 16th century, and should not be said to take any implication for the period we're dealing with. In fact, later on in the Anglian period, all of Dumfries and Galloway is actually part of England. And later on in the medieval period, the border can be as far south as Penrith. So it's a flexible thing. But here we have the Roman roads coming up to Longtown and crossing the border, roughly where the current motorway main road entrance is into Scotland. The routes into Scotland are very limited. The other route is up this dotted line that goes up to Langham. We have one Roman, and then heads up Usewater. We have one Roman marching camp on that route and a Roman signal station right up on the link with Scottish borders. But other than that, we've got very little evidence for the road that's the most easterly road within the region. The primary route is, of course, the one up Annandale, the one that the current main road follows. goes up Annandale and ultimately into Clydesdale and gives you access to the Scottish Central Belt. Kirkpatrick Fleming here is roughly a good day's march north of Carlisle. We've then got another cluster around Burnswark and Birrens and Middleby Hill. Burnswark up there, which is a bit of an oddball. Then you get to the Lockerbie Hub, where the road eastwards to Eskdale heads off, where the road north up Annandale passes, and where you get the turn westwards to go to the furthest ends of the region. For the purposes of this, I've done the known bits of Roman road in black and white, and Roman camps and forts are done in different colours simply to highlight where they are. There's no particular colour scheme to it, and they're certainly not done by period. But here we have Kirkpatrick Fleming, good day's march, at least four known marching camps, and a dotted line outside. There's another linear feature, but we don't know if that's a fifth camp or not. But that's the stopping point for a good first day's march north. Beyond that, we have the Mine Water flowing off the River Annan, and we get the big cluster camps. Now, Birrens Fort is marked down here in red with its two annexes. Birrens is an important fort because it would appear to have some evidence of being occupied, like Newstead over by Melrose, to be occupied after the post-Antonine retreat back to Hadrian's Wall. And it has to be said that most of the road system in Dumfries and Galloway would appear to be 2nd century in date. In England, they have a nice Romano-British period. In Scotland, we have what we call a Long Iron Age, in which there is a Roman interlude, particularly for those of us in the southwest, where Dr. Becky Jones has indicated that we've got a denser concentration of Roman camps than anywhere else in Britain. And it shows that southwest Scotland is primarily a military zone. What we're looking at in terms of Roman activity here is almost exclusively military in nature. The only civilian settlements are those that are appended to forts and fortlets. We have highly limited number of Roman trade goods in native settlements, but the Roman native interaction is something that isn't well understood at the moment, other than in a purely militaristic, aggressive sense. And there's currently an ongoing research project, for instance, looking at this hinterland here, around between Birrens and Burnswark, and looking at Roman and native interactions. As you can see, apart from the fort at Birrens, we've got there's a small fortlet out at Broadley, a number of marching camps around the fort, and then another cluster, another group just further north, where we've got at least 3 now known on Middleby Hill. Birrens, as you can see, is particularly well defended. That's the Mine Water running across the top right-hand edge of the screen. It's got well-defined ramparts and an extensive series of ditches, and then there are scarping banks down on either side of it. In fact, the banks are so scarping that on the Mine Water side, when we get between the cattle and particularly heavy rains, we get erosion exposing sections of the Roman walling. It was excavated in the 1890s, so we have a particularly good, and again in the 1970s, so we've got a series of ground plans that do enable us to identify the structures within the fort, in addition to the highly complex group of earthworks around it. And around 2010 to 2012, there have been some programs of geophysics undertaken, particularly in relation to the civilian settlement in the annex, where we have clear groups of buildings aligned on the Roman road, and the Roman road passing northwards out to heading in the direction of Burnswark. And here you can see the on the aerial photograph the dark lines marking it, denoting the ditches, and you'll see that the defences round the civilian settlement are just as deep and complex as those around the fort itself. And in paler colour, the line of the Roman road heading off northwards. So it moves, that's the Roman road coming out there. There's one marching camp. Middleby Hill, recent geophysics has revealed at least a third camp. There's a possible trace of a fourth one coming up there, but that's some geophysics being done by the Germans at the moment and not yet published. Beyond that, you get to the edifice that is Burnswark Hill, where there's been a fair amount of recent work undertaken, and indeed as part of various development works there are going to be 2 further bits of archaeology there later this year. Burnswark has 2 Roman camps set either side of the largest hill fort in Annandale, and the Roman road, which almost certainly dates them, passes along the western edge of it. There's been a lot of discussion about the nature of events at Burnswark. Some authorities have determined that it's a Roman practice camp, practice siege earthworks. Other people are more convinced that there is a real military assault. And I took with Dr. John Reed at Tremontium Trust, I undertook a programme of work between 2013 and 2017 on the site, doing a combination of metal detecting and excavation. So one of the things we have determined through our geophysics is that, unlike Barber's description from the 1890s, geophysical surveys suggest that there are no permanent buildings in the South Camp, which suggests that its use may be much more temporary in nature than has been thought. This is the result of our metal detecting survey. In particular, what we were interested in was the red signals, which were the lead signals. Examining records from previous excavations there had revealed that 98% of all lead finds were sling bullets. There's only a small amount of lead debris, but other than that, all the lead from both excavations were primarily sling bullets. And sling bullets are fairly solid, chunky bits of lead. They persist in the ground for a long period, they decay very slowly, and they're relatively easy to detect. So we're interested in the distribution of those. And when we clear through all the clutter, this is the distribution of sling bullets. There's a particularly heavy grouping along the north rampart of the South Camp. There's a massive group all the way along the front and the interior of the southeast side of the fort. There's a small scatter where the north entrance to the fort is running away. And then there's a cluster mostly around the southern rampart of the North Camp, but with a particular group by one of the northern entrances to the camp, or exits, were the Romans heading northwards. These are typical of the sling bullets as they come fresh out of the ground. As you can see, very little decay. We not only found sling bullets, the excavations also revealed a number of Roman ballista balls. So we have a series of different missiles. And the group in the North Camp turned out to be the largest cache of Roman sling bullets from anywhere in the empire. We very carefully put the excavation trench to only go partially through the deposit. So we think we've excavated about 50% of the deposit, and that's revealed 380 sling bullets in that particular cache so far. We've also, as a result of the work, had to redo the typology of Roman sling bullets. We've the type 1s shown here and 1Ds, commonly known as lemons, and type 2s known as acorns, were were the main typical group, and they were the types that were known beforehand. But Burnswark has also found type 3, which are our aerophonic ones that make a whistling noise, type 4 biconicals, type 5 sphericals, and type 6, which are currently described as capsular, because I told John that calling them minion shaped was the thing of the period and would look horribly outdated in 20 years' time, and the reference would be lost on everyone. This is also a section of type 2, the acorn type sling bullets, but these are actually found from stratified deposits in the Roman fort at Birrens to the south of Burnswark. And one of the interesting things we had was when we did the lead isotope analysis, looking at lead sling bullets across Western Europe, we found that the Burnswark group and the Birrens ones are in a very, very tight grouping. They got a very distinct isotopic signature. And that means that whilst the majority of the finds at Burnswark were unstratified and in hill wash immediately above the archaeological deposits, the identical signature means that they are from probably the same group that were at Birrens beforehand, and that's in a tightly stratified deposit that's late Hadrianic or early Antonine in date. And the identical lead signatures give us a strong indication that that's actually the date of the two Roman camps at Burnswark. We know that the lead signatures for the sling bullets in both of the camps and on top of the hill fort are identical. And that shows that the two camps are certainly at one period in use at the same time, and therefore contemporary. There were indications, obviously they only turn up on the last day of the excavation, but we did find an earlier rampart on the south camp indicating that that's in two phases. So our Roman slingers have travelled northwards, and recent work by my colleague John Reed has found sling bullets with a similar isotopic signature down at Ambleside in Cumbria. We know the lead comes from the Forest of Dean, and what we're probably looking at is maybe a supply route that runs up the west coast of Britain, possibly supplied by sea up into the area behind the wall and then carried forwards. This is what I call the Lockerbie Hub. The black squares are forts, the black diamonds are camps, the purple lines are roads, red things are various stray finds. But you can see at Lockerbie how we get this cluster of roads here. The road to Eskdalemuir heading out that way, the one heading northwards, ultimately up to Beattock and Moffat and off into Clydesdale, and the main Roman road heading westwards. The very first drawing that we show, the Roman roads one, actually has it going somewhere south of Dalswinton through Dumfries. But what people who don't know the area don't factor in is Locher Moss down here. Locher Moss is 2 miles wide and penetrates 9 miles inland from the sea. And prior to the construction of various embankments across it in the medieval period, the only access into Dumfries is actually on what is currently the Edinburgh Road, and is in from the northeast here on the Tinnell to Lockerbriggs Ridge. So anything that, and we clearly have the Roman road, we've got indication of the Roman road and camps going into Dalswinton. So ideas that they pass south of that area are closer in alignment to the current road simply don't work prior to the early 12th century. There is a possible road heading down to Wardlaw. We've got no definite evidence for it, but I've spoken to 3 different farmers who describe a very hard, stony area in their field. Hasn't shown up on Lidar, hasn't shown up on aerial photographs, but I've got to say, I'm literally joining the dots for where the local farmers say that there's a particularly stony patch in all their fields that they notice when they're ploughing. Moving up, we have at Lockerbie, we have Ladywood Fort here, partly eroded by the River Annan that zigzags its way and flows from side to side across the bottom of its valley. Frequently floods, frequently makes the news in floods. So Ladywood is the fort. There's Torwood Camp next to it. Heading north, prior to the motorway, this is the old A74 heading northwards at Dinwoody Green, and the line of the Roman road can be seen running pretty much parallel or adjacent to it. So it's the same route that stays in use and persists in use right through to the modern day. When it gets up to Beatock and Moffat, we get another cluster of Roman activity. We have a series of, we have a fort in green with an annex in blue, and a series of temporary camps at Milton, and then 3 large and possibly more, but 3 very large marching camps on the flat home of the River Annan up at Beatock. The Ordnance Survey shows the Roman road passing through, sticking on the west bank of the Annan, but aerial photography has indicated to us that there is also a Roman road goes north-south on the east bank of the Annan, and it may well cut across and link up somewhere in this region here. However, I've got 2 nice big developments proposed for National Grid works here. So it may be that future excavation works will actually reveal to us where it comes in. This is the complex on top of the hill. You can see the steep-sided banks. It's a very steep-sided promontory. We do have one fort, we have a number of annexes and a number of enclosures and at least 1 temporary camp. That takes us off into the borders. Heading eastwards, we have the Roman road to Eskdalemuir. And here is, from 15 years ago, my one bit of excavation through a Roman road. They're putting a forestry bypass road round to bypass Eskdalemuir village. And in proper time team style, I had 1,100 hectares of hillside, was given 1 JCB and a digger, put in 1 14-metre long trench and went straight across the Roman road, because the former council archaeologist and myself were both quite confident we knew where it went. It has grey layers showing road makeup and drainage ditches either side, and much to the delight of the locals, they were delighted to see that the Romans were filling in their potholes in a way that they suggest that the current council doesn't. That passes over to the River Esk, goes past the Roman fort shown here, or fortlets down at Eskdalemuir. It's a nice snowy picture in case, for those, just to remind folk that we are in Scotland. And beyond that, there is Rayburn Fort temporary camp, which I sort of found by accident. I was actually doing some work on agricultural scheme up there, and I sent some pictures for clarification up to the then Royal Commission in Edinburgh, who were looking at my work and spotted the Roman camp in the course of trying to disentangle the various earthworks that I'd seen and sent up to them. We have a Neolithic long barrow running through it as well, but these are the slight remains of the Roman earthworks for the camp at Rayburn Fort. Moving westwards from Annandale, we have the road that comes over into Nithsdale. This is north of Dumfries, and this is Dalswinton. There's a major group of Roman forts, at least 2, and an annex at Bankhead. There's a possible one at Bankfoot, but there's a series of large marching camps there and 2 smaller camps on the east bank. And one of the things that is noticed going through Dumfries and Galloway is that the forts and the marching camps are very much set on the east side of the rivers, suggesting that they are forces moving westwards into potentially hostile territory and leaving the rivers in between themselves and potential foes in the area they're moving into, which makes sound military sense. The bits of Roman road we can identify include the Roman road coming in from Annandale, sections of the Roman road passing the temporary camps and heading up the ridge past the Roman fortlet to head on up Nithsdale. And we've got an indication of one crossing over the Nith and forming part of the main westbound Roman route, heading in a southwesterly direction. There's some particular problems in this area of Nithsdale. We have a Roman fort, another fort down at Carril, and a fortlet or marching camp at Gallowby. Carril's interesting because we've got indications where the red dot is of a probable extramural bathhouse. We've got lots of darkened soil and lots of fire clay tiles, but there's been no particular works done on the site. But we have this group of things at only Dalswinton appears to be the crossing, but we have a number of other sites that are shown adjacent to the Nith on the edge of the floodplain. This is the group at tighter view of the group at Dalswinton itself. That's shown as a crop mark. These all show up very nicely as crop marks. This is the fort complex up at the top of the ridge, where you can see there's a number of annexes and the fort continues into the field there. These are the camps on the home down at Dalswinton. Heading northwards, we have the Roman road passes through Nithsdale. There are some bits where we've got good crop markings. Other bits are uncertain, but in one case we had a line for where we thought that the Roman road probably crossed one of the tributaries into the River Nith just south of where the Cample Water is, just south of Thornhill. Much to our delight, about 5 years ago, a metal detectorist working in the field adjacent to where we thought the Roman road should cross the Cample Water managed to turn up a particularly fine, well-preserved Roman lead weight. Heading into Mid-Nithsdale, we've got a particular group. We have a fort, possibly two fortlets or a fortlet and an annex at Carron Bridge, and then a whole cluster around Drumlanrig, where we have at least two Roman forts and 3 camps. Interestingly, the crossing for the road coming down from Carron Bridge appears to be to the south of the fort, but you can see this is a very flat home area, and the one place where anybody will put a fortification is on the ridge here, which is where the later medieval Tibbers Castle has been built, and it's guarding the ford and the crossing place. This is the crop marks and parch marks of the fort at Drumlanrig. And this is the geophysics undertaken by Wessex Archaeology when they did some trial trenching there for evaluations for Time Team back in 2004. Now, there was a policy at Historic Environment Scotland where we weren't allowed to put forward sites for designation. They were done as a result of the then Historic Scotland's field surveys. And Jane, the former Caimsel archaeologist, and myself had a list of top 10 sites in Dumfries and Galloway. When Historic Environment Scotland, the newer body, made scheduling and listing more open and made application forms for scheduling available online, this was our #1 site. I put in all the documents that went with it and Wessex's report. And my justification statement in that box said, even Tony Robinson said, quote, "I can't believe this isn't scheduled," unquote. And that was my entire submission for it. It is now scheduled. Going on the road from Carronbridge, we have one of the interesting bits. We found tracks of the Roman road through a series of quarry pits. And I sort of discovered this one by accident. The original record had a series of quarry pits between the crossing point at Tibbers and the some Roman marching camps further up the valley. But I was actually able to hook the series of isolated records for pit groups and see that they determined a Roman road. And I've just circle the Bronze Age barrow there. This will come to feature later on. But this heads up to that route. That road heads up to the Durrisdeer Pass, where we have this beautifully preserved Roman fortlet. That's the later medieval route. The Roman route actually breaks off and comes over down this route and passes just immediately to the side of the fortlet. It looks much better from the uphill side and from the air than it does approaching from underneath, but the views are quite spectacular, and you can see all the way across Nithsdale from the top. Heading, and the Roman road continues from, we assume the Roman road continues. We have Roman camps further up and Roman fortlet further up the River Nith at Sanker and Kirkconnell, but there's no trace of the road heading up there. Or the record simply states that it's probably under the current A76 road. This is heading out of Nithsdale, heading westwards, and originally from Dalswinton at the top there, the route is thought to head in a southwesterly direction. We have a Roman camp at Gribton that's turned up some 1st century AD horse fittings. We've got a series of temporary camps at Shore Head, and then down at Lockfoot we have a small Roman fortlet and a group of at least 4 marching camps by the side of the loch. And they're heading westwards towards Glenlocker, where we have a very well preserved Roman fortlet and a series of marching camps. It's quite complicated. This is a plan of the from Historic Environment Scotland, of their aerial photographs. The Roman fortlet is quite obvious. Some of the camps are more obvious than others. However, for those of you who are familiar with the Roman camp at Inchtooth Hill and want to say, oh, look, lots of Roman pits, sadly, it's not always the case. We do have a series of Bronze Age circles here, and when a housing development came here for this group of pits immediately outside that Roman temporary camp, we excavated all of them, got good charcoal deposits, and they were all Neolithic in date. This is the cluster. There is the fort and at least two annexes, or maybe an annex and a later extension to it at Glenlocker. We've got traces of the Roman road going up to the crossing point. We don't have them on the other bank because there's a Second World War anti-aircraft position there guarding the Glenlocker barrage. But you can see, again, the river is always to the west. In determining the route, what we do have is 1st, 2nd century Romano-British coin found as a metal detecting find, and the small Roman coin hoard, purse hoard. So we suspect that actually when it crosses, the Roman road probably moves in a southwesterly direction originally. So there is Glenlocker. It was originally thought that it might follow the route of the old military road here, but actually the finds are suggesting it might follow a more southerly route, and a possible Roman fort that I found on an old air photograph set within a prehistoric enclosure at a place called Standing Stone Hill. We've got the enclosure, we've got the probable fortlet, we haven't got a standing stone. but that may indicate part of the route. Heading westwards, it moves on to Gatehouse of Fleet. Now, Gatehouse of Fleet is really unusual. We have the Roman road passing to the south, and we have the Roman fortlet. But what we don't have here, what we've not found any evidence for, are any marching camps at all. And it's not that we're short of information. Aerial photographs indicate that we do have standing stones there. We have prehistoric burials. We have a Roman road with a series of quarry pits. We have a late Iron Age farmstead. And we've got a whole series of Bronze Age burial mounds that the Roman road carefully picks its way through. So we get good crop marks in the area. We've got very good prehistory showing. But for some reason, Gatehouse of Fleet, we haven't so far located any Roman marching camps there whatsoever. Heading out way to the west, we had the new discovery in 2010 of a Roman fortlet at Bladnoch by Wigtown. And subsequent to that, there's been further aerial photography that indicates there is a possible marching camp associated with it. Westwards beyond that, we have Glenluce, which on those early maps had no evidence of a Roman activity whatsoever. There's a very large marching camp at Glenluce, and the Roman road where it's crossed the Luce can be seen clearly passing to the south of it. So what that means is that when the Roman road has come over from Gatehouse of Fleet and come in over on this side, the original thought, the old traditional thought, was that it followed the route of the later 18th century military road, whose route can be seen as this dotted line passing to the north. But there have been no Roman remains. The two Roman finds there are probably 18th century imports. They're probably not in situ for a Roman site. And there's no trace of any other Roman activity along this northern route, which was the traditional route for it. But since the discovery of the fortlet and the marching camp, and we've got another purse hoard just above Cretan, where we think there may be a fort, it's quite possible that they actually cross over from Cretan to Wigtown, and that the route passes then through the Maccas and over to the fort, to the camp at Glenluce. And some years ago, when I first came up to Dumfries and Galloway in the late 1980s, I came up to work on the Whittle excavations. And I used to live in Wigtown. And although this is tidal and has tide links and flats here, and it's tidal all the way up to Newton Stewart, I've met old boys down the pub in Wigtown who used to walk over the sands to go to wakes in Cretan. So we know that if you know the route, it's perfectly possible, and it's indicated on the First Edition Ordnance Survey map, that there is a fordable route between there that was certainly in use through to the later 20th century. And there's no reason why it wouldn't be equally navigable in the Roman period. And then you head beyond, heading westwards further still. You go past Dunragit, and we've got a very good section of Roman road passing series. You can see the little quarry pits. This is heading way to the west, south of Dunragit and below Castle Kennedy. And when you look here, these are the quarry pits, and this is line of Roman road following between the quarry pits. And again, there's yet another circular enclosure. And you can see on the aerial photograph, the line of quarry pits is quite clear here. And the circular enclosure is just there, and the Roman road heads towards it and then avoids it. And this is very similar to the position at Carron Bridge, because in both cases, these are Bronze Age burial mounds. This is a ditch, and there would have been a burial mound with a burial kist inside it. So in both cases, what we suspect is that the Bronze Age burial mound was an upstanding physical feature in the landscape at the point where the Roman road approached, and that they veer around it, that they appear to be, I wouldn't necessarily say treating it with reverence, but they appear to be both here and in the Bronze Age burial complex at Gatehouse of Fleet and over at Saltseat Lock. The Romans appear to be taking a particular decision to avoid Bronze Age burial mounds with their roads. The road can then be checked in some more recent aerial photographs and, much to my delight, still visible on Bing maps with their aerial photographs. The Roman road can be seen tracking west, further westwards. That's the section of Roman road here at Deer Park. The section we were just looking at was here. Now, this was a recent discovery. Prior to this, I would have been prepared to bet that the Roman road followed this brown route up here along the ridge and heads up the side of Loch Ryan up there. But there are indications that it does appear to be heading. There is a second smaller ridge here. This area is particularly boggy. There's a piece of raised ground here. In the Mesolithic period, about 6,000 years ago, the whole of this area was actually underwater and was a coastal lagoon. So I would have thought the Romans would have followed that route, but the new indications are that there is a route passing there. We've got no trace of it west of Stranraer. There's nothing out on the Rinns of Galloway. Any tracks for a Roman road heading northwards? There's one linear feature at Inner Messon that has been interpreted as one side of a Roman camp, but it's very, very tenuous. But in the Second World War, the No. 2 military port was built on Loch Ryan because they have worried concerns about the Germans bombing Liverpool and Glasgow docks to a point where they were inoperative. So a massive construction took place in the Second World War to build deep water harbours to which American troops coming for D-Day landed, and a railway route up it, and that's pretty much obliterated anything of any significance on that side. So whether or not there was a Roman base, naval base on Loch Ryan, we don't know. The current thoughts are that there might be one around Inner Messon, because Inner Messon and its motte is the later medieval settlement prior to the construction of Stranraer. And Loch Ryan does continue to be a sheltered loch and a noted port right through to the modern day where the ferries for Ireland go from it. So there may be a Roman naval supply station in Loch Ryan supplying the Roman troops moving northwards. And in Galloway, Dumfries and Galloway, it's very important to remember the maritime route. Dumfries and Galloway extends east-west with the Solway on its southern edge, and is traversed by a series of north-south river valleys up which we've seen the Roman roads running. Here we're looking at the area around Annan. We have one Roman camp here on Annan Hill, and two, possibly three, over at Newby. But rather like the crossing at Wigtown, we know that here you've got Hadrian's Wall coming in the southeast corner. We know that there is a crossing point that goes from Bowness on Solway to a stone in the estuary known as the Altar Stone, over to the end of the old railway viaduct just south of Annan. And this route was traversed. I've noticed online that somebody traversed this route in 2016. And it's what we call a wath, Solwath, the inner Solway. That's the Bowness wath. But the wath is the crossing place. And there are actually three of them. And it does bring into question the discussions later on in discussing Roman Britain about the natives getting round the wall. Well, at this end of the wall, they could literally walk over. But of interest is not only the group there, but the red dot there, which is another Roman purse hoard that is recent metal detector find in the last 5 years. And there may well be a Roman route heading off up to link with the Annandale road there, but nothing shown up to date. And on the Nith, we have Lanternside. We're here at Wardlaw. The shown here is the Roman camp. The 1 to 50,000 map says Roman fort. It is a camp, but interestingly, there's a line of earthworks with a Roman style entrance that link it to the native Roman fort on Wardlaw. And it's strongly suspected that there may have been the Romans may have reused the fort and perhaps had a signal station inside it. It has commanding views of the inner and outer Solway, and you can see all the way across to the Lake District and the whole line of Hadrian's Wall. It's very prominent within the landscape. And we have this is the River Nith coming off the Solway heading up into Dumfries, where I currently am. We have a small fortlet at Lanternside with 2 annexes. And the original shoreline is actually much, much closer. It's not where the current road is shown, but it's closer to the 10-metre contour running along here. So it may be that there is actually a missing Roman frontage here, and that Lanternside is part of a waterborne supply system, bringing supplies up from Cumbria and then taking them up towards where Wardlaw is, and the ridge heading north, along which the farmers told me they got this hard track. Here is the fortlet at Lanternside, and here are the 2 annexes lying next to it. And this is one of the native farmsteads, which continue in use into the 2nd century, and shows that there is considerable native farming carrying on in the local vicinity. So it may be that there is local produce being moved up as well. So that's why we have this potential Roman road running up here. But Locher Moss extends there, and why the main Roman road passes to the north here and then heads out. Interestingly, we've only put a dotted line north of that massive complex at Glenlocher. We have a couple of finds from Dalry, but there are no Roman finds found heading up north over to on the route up to, I mean, that's our border with Ayrshire, and there are no Roman finds here, unlike Nithsdale, where we can show you that there is a series of forts up here. We've got the odd isolated Roman fort that doesn't have any road system associated with it. We know that in the medieval period, this route across here is part of a medieval pilgrimage route from Edinburgh down to Wigtown at the end of Galloway. Tinron Doon is a commanding hill fort there, Dark Age citadel. And the 18th century early road maps show that there is a cross route between Nithsdale and the Ken Valley. But other than one single Roman fortlet at Kirkland, we have no trace of Roman road here. Between Lockfoot with its forts and camps there and Glenlocher, we have no Roman road. I've recently had a pipeline that cut all the way across. It came up from this route here and went across, and despite the fact that the archaeologists spent 5 months on site and were looking out for a Roman road, because they knew in theory passing between down here and up there they would cross it, no trace of it's been found. So we have Roman finds, we have more Roman military sites now than we previously had. We have known sections of Roman road, but we still have an awfully large number of gaps, an awfully large number of dotted, well, there could be one here. And as public Lidar is becoming more available, Scottish Government's made Lidar available, and about 85% of Dumfries and Galloway is covered. Some members of the Roman Road Association and people who've been to my lectures have of late been sending me some very interesting looking Lidar images, one of which indicates that we could, for instance, have another maritime camp somewhere down here. Right next, oddly enough, right next to the X marks the spot, which is where a coin mold was found for forging Roman coins. Never let it be said that the Gallovidians didn't fleece passing visitors. But you'll equally see, in terms of trade, just how easily accessible it is to Cumbria and what we would define as within the bounds of empire. So our maps moved on. Our maps moved on in the last decade. It appears to be moving on in the future. I'm happy to take any questions, but in my role as regional archaeologist, if any of the members of the Roman Road Research Association want to play with our LiDAR and send me any more suggestions for Roman roads, Roman signal stations, or any such thing that might help me fill in my various blanks, I will be more than appreciative of them. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much, Andrew. That was a most fascinating, and it was too riveting because I was trying to get Jim Crow's talk up online while you were talking, and I couldn't concentrate, so made a hash of that. But for anybody who's listening, it is there now, in some sort of form. No, that was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to put one question from myself first, because whilst I wasn't concentrating, I missed something vital regarding the date of Burnswark. You probably won't know, but one of my own interests is the Stainmore, and the only thing that looks like the camps along the Stainmore Road is Burnswark.
Currently, there are 2 south camps at Burnswark, and there is 1 north camp. The north camp is contemporary with the later camp at the south. And at the moment, both our finds and the carbon-14 dates we have got indicate that what we are describing as the missile event, where lots of missiles leave the Roman camps and end up on top of the hill fort, occurs sometime in the middle part of the 2nd century. So in our current broad dating, roughly between 135 and 160.
Right. Which is what I'd hoped.
But there is an earlier camp under the south camp.
Yeah, but it doesn't look like that one. That's what I'd hoped you'd say, because it means that they can't possibly be related. We know the ones on Stainmore must be before the road was built over there in around about 80. So brilliant. Right, that's enough from me. On straight to the questions, which are coming in already. If anybody else has got another question, or you want to ask one while we're actually talking, by all means, please do. You're okay with that, Andrew? Sometimes the Q&A can go up quite some time.
No, that's fine. If you don't mind, I'll keep my screen open in case I need to refer to anything on it. So I haven't been following the chat column.
Right, well, the first one is from Paul Brunsden. The extensive embankment and defences at Birrens appear similar to those at Epiarchum near Alston and further north at Ardagh. Is this significant?
It may be, but the thing with the defences at Birrens is that there are indications that there may be something earlier, and although a lot of work has been done on the interior of the fort itself, there's been very little work done for actually dating the defences and looking at the sequence of the defences there.
Okay.
And this is where I'm holding my hand up and saying I'm an early medievalist. But no, there's been relatively little work done. But there is this ongoing project looking at the wider environment around Birrens and Burnswark and the Roman road route. Though my latest, most up-to-date report, which I was given yesterday, is that Christopher Rummel and the Germans, who were there in September, appear to have lost our previously well-defined Roman road somewhere just south between Middleby Hill and Burnswark.
Oh, okay. Lost in what way? I mean, they couldn't read.
It hasn't turned up on any of the geophysics signals anywhere.
Okay.
They've been keeping a pretty good track of it, and suddenly this year it wasn't showing up in routes on what was the presumed route.
Hmm. That's using gradiometers, presumably.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does happen. Got experience of that myself when we've done two sites a couple of years apart, and a ditch that showed up very strongly in one image 2 years later was not there on the plot. Of course, it still was there, and we know it was because we excavated it. So it does happen.
I shall keep my fingers crossed then, because here, zooming in at Lockerbie, above Lockerbie and above the junction, I have a lovely late 18th century map that shows a square fortification on it and has Agricolas Castle written next to it. And was an absolute doozy, but we commissioned some geophysics, and there's a crop mark that there appears to be a square crop mark on on at least one aerial photograph, that is where Ainsley's map says Agricolas Castle is. But I had some geophysics done there, and absolutely nothing showed up whatsoever.
Well, soil.
But your tale does encourage me that maybe I should put some stuff together and put a couple of trenches through just to make certain.
It's always a good idea, and sometimes soil conditions and geology mean you don't get any results anyway.
Yeah,
and there's so many factors involved. Next question. I think you actually answered this. This is from David Breer. Do we know where the lead came from? I'm pretty sure you said the Forest.
Yes, yeah, the lead is from Forest of Dean. So we suspect that it's shipping out down the Solway and then heading up a West Coast maritime route.
Yeah.
There was an earlier position statement made in the early stage project where we thought originally some of the original German reports had suggested it was from Germany. And somewhere there are, from about 2015, there may be a couple of online lectures in which that still exists. But the Germans who were doing our isotope analysis weren't entirely happy with the figures, so they went back and retested them all. Because one of the things we've genuinely been interested, we know that we've got a lot of lead up at One Lock Head, and we know that the 18th, 19th century lead works have certainly obliterated all except a few traces of some 17th century works there. And there was a question of whether or not the Romans had moved up to exploit it. But there was also, we were thinking in terms of supply, if there is a real assault at Burnswark, are they getting lead from Alston as a local supply source? So we tested lead ores from Alston and from One Lock Head as part of our program, and they've got completely different profiles.
There's another question finally relating to the lead bullets. Let me just remember who it was who asked it. There we go. John Matthew the Fourth. How deadly were they?
You know, I thought that there was a possibility this might come up, so I have a separate lecture lurking down here. Give me a second. There's a Roman sling bullet going through some ballistic gel. Thank you, Channel 4. They are, interestingly enough, one of the things we have found, we've done a lot of experimental work with the sling bullets. And one of the things we have discovered in all the cases where we've used the ballistic gel is that ultimately, once they've made contact with something, all the sling bullets align themselves along alignment. And the scary thing there is that you'll see it's actually splitting open the gel ahead of where it's going. Dr. John Reed, my co-project worker at Burnswark, is a medical doctor. they have the same stopping power as a 4.4 Magnum. This has been proven. But they've got an effective range out to 180 meters, but they can reach further. But they're not as fast as a bullet, but they contain considerably more mass. And quite frankly, the prospect of we've currently metal detected and excavated nearly 900 across the two camps and the hill fort. The idea of running into one of those doesn't appeal to me in the slightest.
The question actually from one of our volunteers this evening, Jim. So I'm going to keep on this subject and then move on. Who asks why there were so many there? This is touching to the potential purpose of Burnswark. He asks, was it for skirmish, practice, storage, or was it a siege camp? I know that David Breeze still isn't convinced by the latter. Had that conversation a week ago.
I understand David Breeze is unconvinced. Lawrence Kepi, however, is thoroughly convinced. And this is one of the reasons that John got me to excavate Burnswark is because I'm an early medievalist. I am not coming at this wedded to it being a training camp or wedded to it being a real assault. I have no professional or academic case or backstory to make in this. I came in as an early medievalist to tell John what the archaeology would allow him to say, and equally importantly, what it wouldn't allow him to say. My opinion as a non-Romanist is that I think there is sufficient archaeological evidence to suggest that an assault on Burnswark, not a siege and not a training exercise, but a short, fairly maybe over the course of 3 or 4 days, a short assault on Burnswark matches the evidence better than existing evidence for a training camp or for a siege. I mean, I know David Breeze makes comments like, oh, it's not a very big hill, you could get up there very easily. This depends on whether or not David Breeze has tried it in full armor or not.
I'll ask him next time I see him.
I know the answer. Don't go there. But no, but on the other hand, I have had a Roman in full armor go up that hill, and it isn't as easy. It is not as easy as all that at all. And as excavation director, I was simultaneously excavating the South Camp and the North Camp, and I've had to go up and down over that hill several times in a day, and even unencumbered, it's not an easy thing to do. No. But I would say, I mean, we're still writing the site up, but I would say on balance as a neutral that the current evidence more closely aligns with a short assault than it does with a protracted siege or with a training camp.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I'm convinced. We've got an awful lot of questions, so we better get through them quickly. From Bob.
No, I'm fine. I was expecting.
What number of soldiers would have been accommodated / active across this area? I suppose what he maybe haven't considered, Bob, is that a lot of the sites you've been looking at were not all there at the same time.
No, and quite clearly, as evidenced at Dalswinton and at Glenlocker, we have different Roman forces moving backwards and forwards across the region at different times. Now, I mean, effectively, we don't know, there may be, there will be some marching camps associated with Agricola and his activities. There may be some predating Agricola. There will be a whole series done with the Antonine invasion and subsequent occupation, and there may or may not be, we've got no dating, no hard dating that there's anything necessarily relevant with the Severan early 3rd century invasion. But it would be surprising to leave the southwest out of the equation entirely. One would have thought some forces would be moving through, because all these indications are that whatever was going on, the natives in Galloway were quite restless. You get this constant positioning of the rivers in between. The small camps we've got can take 500 or 600 men. Certainly at Burnswark, the south camp takes about 5,500 and the north camp about 3,500, which suggests that you've got a combined because we can demonstrate that they're clearly contemporary, that would give you a combined force of 8,000. And certainly some of our larger camps could push around in the 8 to 12,000 one. So we are looking at major Roman forces moving up on the West Coast route.
Okay, moving on. Not a question. This is from Alison Spencer. Just very envious of all the Roman sites. Alison's on the Yorkshire Wolds, and there are virtually nothing. So for Roman period sites, but nothing military at all.
I have done watching briefs on the Wolds. I've done pipeline watching briefs over there. I'm well familiar with almost the lack of anything in some areas of it.
Well,
except rain and fog and plenty of horizontal snow. You
need to talk to Alison, because they've done huge amounts of geophysics on her part of the Wolds, and some of the results are absolutely stonking.
Brilliant.
There's stuff everywhere. From David Breer, who's not far from that part of the world. Some of these marching camps are funny shapes, aren't they? He's not wrong.
Gosh. Oh yes, I mean, Wardlaw is genuinely Wardlaw is one of the few exceptions in being a traditional playing card shape. We've got ones that are parallelograms. They're neither of the Burnswark camps are regular. In one case, excuse me for a minute, I'll just go and see if I've got the other. Just get back to South Camp. There we go. Right. Burnswark South Camp is not a regular shape, but partly because there's a deeply ditched Iron Age farmstead whose defences they have chosen to incorporate in the northeastern corner. And there's another prehistoric settlement on the west side, adjacent to the gateway. There's some discussion as to whether that pre or post dates it, but there's another rectangular feature. So we think that the shape of the South Camp has decided to utilise pre-existing prehistoric earthworks, because as any soldier would tell you, you don't, if somebody else has already put a trench there, you don't go and dig a new one next to it. No. And the North Camp is particularly irregular. We see there are two entrances to the hill fort at Burnswark. The third one, George Joby's excavations on the east one, indicate that it wasn't actually a gateway, it had a rampart across it. But the central and southern ones are the two primary access routes. There's only one route in from the north. On a military basis, you wouldn't attack that because it's quite a deep in-turn. You'd be exposed. There's only one way in. The defenders can concentrate their firepower, and you're coming up a steep-sided coombe being attacked on your own by missiles on your shielded and unshielded sides. It's an absolute death trap. In terms of an assault, the south one is much more aggressively positioned, closer to the slope. That rampart is well within the parameters for sling range. In fact, you can reach the back rampart with the sling from the forward rampart of the Roman South Camp. The effective Roman sling range is between the forward rampart of the south camp and the back rampart of the hill fort for a lot of it. So they can cover that with any fire. We think that the area to the west here is incredibly boggy. All you'd need, this is another prehistoric farmstead with standing earthworks. All you'd need is a small cavalry patrol in there to stop anybody when they get stuck in the bog. The only dry route out is a ridge that comes in along this side. There are cliffs at the east end of the hill fort that you can't get down. If the Romans were assaulting from the south, you have to exit by the north. And the extended Roman camp on the north side would expose you to fire all the way along the attempt to get out of that side of the ridge. And that's why we suspect that our sling bullet lead distribution suggests that if people were trying to escape out there, that they may well have, that this fire may be fire from the north camp dealing, or missiles from north camp dealing with people trying to escape out to the northern end. And quite significantly, they only get 150 meters out of the valley. They only get 100 meters out of the end of this deep combe, heading towards the dry ridge there. Nobody makes, if those are escapees, they can't get into the boggy ground and nobody makes it any further.
That all makes perfect sense to me. Quickly from Karen Johnston, it's not a question, but she lived in the area apparently 20 years ago and had no idea that all that was there. Well, 20 years ago, we didn't know much of that was there, really, did we? It's a lot of it's quite recent. Anyway,
I should point out, I started with the council in 1999, and at that point, the Historic Environment Record had 8,800 archaeological sites and historic buildings on it. It's now got 32,500.
Yeah.
I personally found over 800 sites in the region. And the more I look at Lidar and aerial photographs, the more I find.
Another on the same vein from Kevin Stewart. Amazing to see there's so much here. I'm assuming he lives in your area as well. We have the Digging Gardener, who's a regular. Very different attitude to the roads in Dorset, which simply cuts straight through extant burial mounds.
Oh, that's interesting. Now that is interesting. Because I thought when I found the Karen Bridge one, I thought it was isolated until I discovered that particularly at Gatehouse, we've got very good indications of where the Bronze Age burials are, and literally the Roman road zigzags its way between them.
Yeah, and that is actually more common. It is quite actually rare for roads to go straight through existing monuments, funerary ones anyway.
Yeah.
So the more often avoid, the more certainly respect them. From Dylan Matthews, also a regular. Any thoughts about whether Romans may have been considering an invasion of Ireland from these areas or the naval bases? Perhaps why roads are pushing out to this coastline?
Certainly one reason why they'd be pushing out to the coastline. And obviously the northward route goes up to Girvan and up the Ayr coast and so on. And if you're doing any naval supplies up to the western end of the Antonine Wall, you'd want to keep an eye out along the coast anyway. Yeah, quite possibly. I mean, you can stand literally anywhere along the Rinns of Galloway here. You can stand there and see Ireland on the other side of it very, very clearly. Ireland is exceedingly visible. And for instance, going non-Roman, we've recently had a complete Viking cross slab turn up over near Port William on the Maccas just here. And it didn't look like the well-known Whithorn group. It looks more like a Manx cross. But actually, as you come down the farm track to the Mesolithic raised beach to drop down to the coast, the Isle of Man is absolutely obvious. The Isle of Man's a day sailing south.
Yeah.
There was a noted Scottish academic who suggested in a published volume that the Vikings would have sailed down Loch Ryan and portaged their boat across to Luce Bay. Excuse me a second, my power cable appears to have dropped, and my computer is telling me that I've lost it. Give me a second to load this one back in. There we go. My machine is happy again. Right. So anyway, and my view of that was the same as comments about people going up hill forts in armor. I have portaged a Viking longship. I know what it's like. Nobody in their right mind will portage from Loch Ryan down to Glenluce. You just wait till the winds and the tides were right, and you'd sail down the North Channel. Yeah. Yeah. We've got quite a few of our Bronze Age swords, particularly in the Rinns of Galloway, but in Galloway in general, are blades from Antrim. So we've got evidence for Bronze Age. We've got Neolithic hand axes that are from Irish stone.
Yes.
So we've got Neolithic and Bronze Age activity, passageways by merchants between Ireland and Galloway. And right the way through to in the later, we've got records of in the 16th, 17th century of 17th century, we've got 10,000 head of Ulster cattle shipped over to Galloway and then taken down drove roads to the markets in London. And sometimes they'd take them over to Norwich and fatten them up there and then walk them from Norwich down to London into London markets. Mm. So there would have been absolutely nothing to stop the Romans from going from Loch Ryan over to Ireland if they'd chosen to do so.
Yeah, there is, of course, the famous line in Tacitus, yes, that he gives his father-in-law about being able to take Ireland with just a single legion. Well, he never did, so why not? Anyway, let's move on.
Rather like the Highlands of Scotland, it's full of commercially non-viable land. But why would you want to?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, interesting one, this. If the Romans directly occupied this area for just a limited period, might the patchy record of Roman roads suggest that the Romans never had time to finish their construction?
Quite possibly in some cases. I mean, in other cases, they persist. We've had four finds of decorated Viking period decorated trade weights, lead weights with gilded copper alloy insets into them. One was found on the excavations at Wigtown. All the metal detector finds have been found within half a mile of all these Scandinavian merchants' weights. All of them are inland. All of them have been found within half a mile of a Roman road.
Yeah.
There are strong indications that chunks of our Roman road, as would happen in England, less commonly in Scotland, chunks of our Roman road continue through into the medieval period and are actively being used as trade routes into the early medieval period.
It is extremely common in England, as you rightly say. The vast majority were. There's some that weren't, but the majority were. But we do have some that weren't finished as well. So it's a possible. I suspect most of them were finished. We just haven't found them yet. But we'll get there. I forgot to say that was actually from Rob, another of our volunteers this evening. Rob Entwistle. Thanks, Rob. Silent Observer, this one. That's a new name to me. Just an observation. Very good and wonderful to know there are lots of Roman roads in Scotland. Parts of Scotland. I think.
Yeah, you'd say that if you're a Romanist. From a native point of view, get thee back down over that border. Yeah, I was recently involved. I was going to be part of HS2 project in Dumfries and Galloway, and they were discussing the peel houses and fortifications in North Cumbria, And it's being HS2 Northwest, it is primarily an English archaeology focused group. And they were busy. They were busy explaining the need for peel houses and basel houses to stop to deal with Scotch raids over the border. So I did feel I had to put my hand up and say it wasn't just a one-way enterprise. It's the border has always been very fluid.
It has. We have now dealt with this, but from Glenys Goodwill, links to Ireland, question mark. You covered that perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, especially if it turns out that we have got another. I'm still waiting for. I'm running the other one past Descartes. If I've got another one that looks like a potential coastal naval one there, so we've got the ones at Annan quite clearly there. We've got Lanternside there. If we've got one here where we're getting this more subtly bent to the road now, and whether or not there's one over in Lochrion, then it may well be that a maritime resupply route makes sense. One of the suggestions for our massive cache of sling bullets is simply by the gateway, is that they're right inside the rampart, and it may be that there's some point where they've been moving the stuff around, and the legionaries don't actually want to lug more sackfuls of lead sling bullets. Yeah. But no, I mean supplies of things like that, supplies of all the grain they're going to need, iron, lead and stuff like that, is all going to take some time overland, particularly in the earlier stages before the road system is established.
We've had a question from Gray, who thanks you for an absolutely great talk, as have several people. I've lost track of how many I have, to be honest, Andrew. He lives not far from Withorn, it's pronounced, and he's always on the lookout for things, but he wants to know how he gets hold of Lidar. Is the pre-processed available on the Library of Scotland website? I can't remember.
No, if you Google Scottish Government Lidar, Scottish Government plus Lidar, it takes you to the portal, and you can get them. They come in big sizes, so that they exist as georeferenced TIFF files. You can then run them through free software. If he'd like to send me an email to archaeology@dumgal.gov.uk, I have a document I can send him, which sends links on where to get the Lidar and where to get the free software to go off and process it to get different views and different angles.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you, Andrew.
I'm more than happy to make that available to people.
So anybody else who wants the same, you know where to go now. Yeah, well, they're still coming. We've still got more.
That's fun.
That's a good question from Philip Bevan. Brilliant, clear and inspiring. Why on earth did the missile lead come all the way from the Forest of Dean, given that there's huge numbers of lead mines in Derbyshire and Yorkshire? And that's a very good question.
I'm wondering again if it is. I know they've got lots of lead there. Whether or not it's simply the ease of a maritime West Coast trade route for moving large quantities of it around, because it's much easier to get it down the Severn and up around the coast.
Yes, I think,
and considerably faster.
You're absolutely right. The mines in Derbyshire and Yorkshire, of course, are all on the Pennine Spine. So to get them to the coast to ship out would have been a considerable task anyway. And you'd want to shift them to the west coast, where in both cases it's much easier going the other way. So I think you're almost certainly correct. It's just logistics.
Yeah, I mean, the only ease, aside from coming out to the Severn, the only other easily accessible route into the Irish Sea is through Chester. And we discovered that on excavations that we're on. We discovered that for when we're looking at our Anglo-Saxon and our Viking period coinage, we've got Dublin and Chester mints. Chester gets you in above the Cambrian Mountains of Wales and down below the Pennines and gives you access to the English Midlands. But other than Chester, coming down the Severn and round is the only practicable route. And as you say, there's enough difficulty in getting it off out of the Peak District and westwards.
There's somebody else on the same subject who suggested they could have got lead from the Greenside mine near Glenridding in the Lake District. I don't know the area well enough, but I've not come across any references to suspected Roman work there, but I might be wrong.
And I mean, we have done the isotope analysis on. I think now that John's done 3 more from Ambleside, which do match, and we've done the Birrens ones and the Burnswark ones. We've now done it for somewhere between 15 and 20 sling bullets.
Yeah.
And they are so I think there's at least 15 sling bullets being done now, and they all consistently match Forester Dean.
Yeah, you could
and
see
that's
really clearly.
That's
Yeah.
Unlike when we did the examination and we were looking at the Calcrease ones and the Iberian ones. They've got a much wider spread. It's the people doing the analysis were stunned at how tight a group the Burnswark, Birrens, Northwest England group are.
Yeah, you could see that on the diagram that you showed. That last question was from Kevin Stewart, by the way. I forgot that. Next one from Anthony. Does Dunragit make sense as a Roman allied native polity which later became the capital of Reged?
Reged itself is problematic. Reged itself is hugely problematic. And yes, it is the fort of Reged. Quite where Reged extends, we don't know. Is there really a single polity that extends from Dunragit all the way into Cumbria? Wouldn't seem likely. We certainly know in the heading into the very earliest bit of the early medieval period. So we're looking at 4th, 5th century or 5th century, just coming out of the Iron Age. There are both place names and sculptural studies indicate that there is one polity on the Rinns of Galloway here and an entirely different polity and grouping on the Maccas over here. We've got certainly you can spot me reverting to the early medievalists. Our Scandinavian settlement up the A66 route only takes in Annandale and Eskdale, so we've got Gills and Becks out in the east and north. We've got Welsh-speaking Strathnith that always cuts in between what's happening to the west and what's happening to the east. And Ronan Toulis would quite happily have you believe that in fact the centre of Reged is at Trustees Hill, just south of the fort at Gatehouse. So whether or not Trustees Hill is the centre, and there's a late Iron Age, early medieval polity that extends across here, but even then, I would find it hard to believe that it extended into Cumbria.
Yeah.
And it's one of our problems with Burnswark. People keep asking the question, what tribe lived in Burnswark? Well, actually, we haven't got a clue. No. We really don't. It's on the borders of Novantii. It could be on the borders of Selgovae. The metalwork, the native metalwork we have got looks more Brigantian than anything else. We don't know quite how far the Brigantes extend. Have they extended as far as here? Or is this native material that's being brought in with the Roman army and coming through, given that most of it is harness mounts or scabbard mounts or things like that? So I think Dunragit may be the centre of a polity, but whether or not it is the centre of a polity that is the early medieval kingdom of Reged is very uncertain.
And of course, polities changed through the Roman period as well. And I imagine in Scotland that it's probably more so than anywhere else in Britain. But they developed and they morphed, and we get names suddenly appearing in the late Roman period that you've not seen before. And we're largely dependent on what we think of polities from Ptolemy anyway. And how accurate was Ptolemy going to be writing in Alexandria? So there's so many questions and so little we really know. From owner, I don't know the real name, I'm afraid, commenting on the Greenside mine. Apparently I was right. It's a relatively late development of mining in the Lake District. And somebody observing also that, yes, Yorkshire lead will be going to the East Coast, as I said. From Dave Armstrong, another of our volunteers. Is there any indication of military activity in the early reign of Hadrian when there was known to be warfare in Britain?
There's certainly activity evidence for the Hadrianic period at Birrens. And this is where it gets really problematic. Birrens is one of the few Roman sites that have been significantly excavated. Apart from Birrens and Burnswark, very little fieldwork has been undertaken other than small trial trenches done to determine whether or not J.K. St. Joseph's aerial photographs really were showing Roman camps or not. And even then they can be misleading. For a long time, we had a Roman camp near the crossing of the Aire here down at Dalbeattie. It was seen on aerial photographs, and volunteers came and dug a section through the ditch that was shown on aerial photographs, and a nice, what was described as characteristically V-shaped Roman ditch was found with no dating evidence. But local research later on actually revealed that the ditch goes with a barbed wire fence for a prisoner of war camp, for Italian prisoners of war from the Desert Campaign in the earlier part of the Second World War, but that it flooded so constantly that they were moved to a more permanent camp over here near Twynham. So yes, it was a V-sided ditch, and yes, it was military, but rather like having to call the bomb squad down to my excavations at Burnswark because I found unexploded World War II tank smoke rounds there. Right military context, wrong war.
From G. Nixon. Goodness, right. Which military units were most active in the area?
Genuinely, I don't know, but that's the ignorance of being an early medievalist. I know we've got altar dedications from cohorts of Tungrians. But in all honesty, this is where my imposter syndrome comes in. And as a non-Romanist and a non-specialist, I wouldn't be able to tell you that information.
No, and unfortunately, neither can I, so I can't help either. Not on that one. Apologies, everyone. Were the natives of southwest Scotland very belligerent, so that so much Roman might was required? Mima Campbell, that one from.
Given the big clusters at the river crossings, and given that our Roman interlude lasts 140 years, the fact that, I mean, we still haven't finished counting camps at Dalswinton and Glenlocker, but you said, I mean, Glenlocker's got at least 7, and there are linears that we can't get corners for that indicate that there could be 2 or 3 more there. I mean, at that point, you're looking at 10 phases of substantial troops moving through the region in a 140-year period. It may be normal military activity, resupplying and turnover and regularly moving troops around, recycling troops down from more active areas. I do think the constant placement on the east bank of rivers, and in some cases the sheer quantity of Roman troops and number of Roman events that must be occurring indicate that even at a period where it is between Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall, and therefore within the bounds of empire, it doesn't look as if it's necessarily quiescent for the whole period.
No. And that really tallies with what happens with Hadrian's Wall, because of course the defences didn't stop at the end of the wall. They keep on going down the Cumbrian coast. And there must have been a good reason for that. The two things are almost certainly related, I would have thought.
Yeah. And the word boats is one of them.
Yeah. I think we're finally getting close to the end now. Did the Romans get any benefit from the military activity in Scotland?
Oh, that's a much more bigger strategic question.
Isn't
I
it
don't know. I
just?
mean, one of our discussions around the origins of the Antonine invasion is, which we were discussing in relation to the works at Burnswark, is it to a certain extent the value was in extending the empire and giving Antoninus Pius a victory at the commencement of his reign as emperor. To be following after Hadrian, who is a notably militaristic emperor, but given that they've just been half their legions have been cycled through the Jewish revolt, and clearly there's a lot of worn out troops in the east. It may well be that one of the mooted possibilities for the Antonine invasion of Scotland is simply to do with politics in Rome and isn't primarily focused on defensive or indeed in exploitation. I'm fairly certain the Romans were probably aware there was lead at Wanlock Head, and our indications from a lot of our native sites are that there's a good agrarian zone around there. There's a lot of native farmsteads around Burnswark in that area of Annandale, and the limited amount of pollen that we did get shows primarily arable crops rather than, I mean, these days most of Dumfries and Galloway is cattle production, but there appears to have been considerably more arable in an earlier period. So they would have been able to exploit that. It may be that that's why there is a paucity of material out to the west. It's much more like Ireland. The west of Galloway is much more economically unproductive.
Yeah.
And that the concentration of the Roman roads are up the two primary river valleys, as well as the east-west links going through to the central approach route, the A68 route going up to Tremontium.
I think we're almost there. Yeah, apparently you mentioned further work at Burnswark this year. This is from Diane Donnelly. When and what form will this take? Is that excavation or geophys?
There's some limited excavations watching. There is at the eastern end of Burnswark Hill Fort, there is a small covered reservoir. Scottish Water are laying a new pipeline in that will pass to the northeast of the South Camp, in an area where we hadn't previously got much material. Let me go back to my Romans in D&G lecture. Come on, you. Right, Burnswark camps. No, need this one. Right, there's a little covered reservoir up here. There, and Scottish Water are putting a new pipeline that's going to come down, cut across here, and go down through the fields here. So we've requested archaeological monitoring for the whole of that, especially since this field was left out of the detecting because that's where the lambs were kept with the ewes. So when we were working there, it was never, when they moved them off the hillside for us to work on the hillside, they're kept in that field. So we weren't able to detect into that field. Our two Bronze Age axe heads are actually by a boggy hollow within this field. And you can see we've got some sling bullets on the approach route, and actually a small cluster of 19 that were found here within the plantation. So there are some works there. But also one of the landowners, this is a scheduled monument. You're not meant to do work there without scheduled monument consent. We have had a landowner dig a drain from the well or from the spring down to the gateway. That was done without archaeological monitoring. Historic Environment Scotland are requiring the trench to be re-excavated by hand in areas where it may have passed through archaeological material, and for the sites to be cleaned up and recorded. It'll also be metal detected all the way down there, because if they were machine digging a small, it's only a small narrow bucket, but if they're machine digging, they won't have been looking for fines. So it's quite possible there will be really positive fines. So we've got a series of evaluation works to test how much damage was done running through the South Camp. And we've got a series of archaeological monitoring going off on the eastern edge of the site. And they're both, it may be Scottish Water looking at the bad weather, and this may get postponed to early next year. The remedial works for the drainage trench down here should be due to happen within the next couple of months. I was just speaking with the archaeological contractors this afternoon about it.
We've had another one from Philip Bevan about the lead shot. It's an observation, not a question. How the naval supply of lead shot from the Forest of Dean highlights the sea supply reconnaissance roles, which always seem underestimated and even unrecognised. I think he's right. They are. The use of sea supply, maritime supply, is definitely underestimated in the Roman period. There's no question about that. And the movement of troops as well. I have my own theory, which some of the audience will be well aware of, about movements actually as early as AD 69 up the Solway, but that's another story and another lecture I've already given, so for another day.
Quite clearly, if it's being filmed, it's one I will have to go online and investigate.
I can't remember if it was recorded now, to be honest. I did a big long talk about the Stainmore and possible action by Belanus in AD 69, but coming in from the Solway. It's the only logical explanation of the camps along the Stainmore, the big ones, of which there are now 4, not 3, as most people are aware. And they don't make any sense unless their ultimate target was Stannick coming in from Carlisle. And my theory, and I can never prove it, and I'll never be able to, is that's how they got Cartimandua out. So now you know.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising. Bloodaxe dies on Stainmore trying to get from York to Dublin.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a well-known route for doing that sort of thing.
And I think we're now finally out of questions. And as often happens, the Q&A has taken almost as long as the talk. So I do apologise for that, but it's a measure of how much people enjoyed it, Andrew. And we've still got 107 people with us.
My goodness. Well, thank you to all of you for staying with us for that length of time.
Well, we did start off with 180 something, so
that's rather good.
Yeah, not bad at all. And we're getting a lot of thanks coming in. Sorry?
It'll make my management happy when they ask.
Well, I hope so. No, it was really good. And I have to say, for an early medievalist, you did brilliantly.
I am in the desperately, deeply embarrassing position of finding myself an early medievalist who is now regarded as an expert on Roman sling bullets. To the extent that I'd taken a piece of pot that we can't identify from Burnswark, and National Museum of Scotland can't identify it. The local museum service can't. It doesn't look like any of the prehistoric pottery George Joby found. The Bronze Age specialists are saying it's not theirs. The Iron Age specialists are saying it isn't theirs. We've got nothing local to match it. So I wondered if it was, although it comes from within the hill fort, I wondered, we've got evidence for Roman material from Carlisle coming in. And I thought I'd pop down to Birdoswald this year because I dug with Tony Wilmot on an early medieval site many moons ago. So I popped down to see Tony at Birdoswald to run it past him. And he'd not seen anything like it again, but I did discover they got 2 sling bullets at Birdoswald. And Tony has read my we've got one paper out, and I have another, it's was it Journal of Roman Military Equipment Studies or something like that.
Yeah.
John Reed sent me the draft 2 days ago and told me that the deadline is the end of this month. And now I've seen and it was written prior to my seeing the sling bullets in Tully House. So I'm going to have to read through it and revise it. But it now looks like I might be doing Birdoswald sling bullets as well. Which is an early medievalist. I excavated the Galloway hoard. I'm an early medievalist to the bone. Discovering that you are now one of the leading experts on Roman sling bullets, it's uncertain. But but my conservatory out the back does currently have 586 sling bullets in it.
I think that makes you an expert. You can't get away from it.
Every one weighed to 1/10 of a gram and measured to 1/10 of a millimeter, and examined under a lens. I know far too much about Roman sling bullets for a medievalist.
Oh, you can't possibly know too much about Roman sling bullets.
I'm getting to feel like that.
I think the time's come to bid everybody a good night and to thank Andrew again for an absolutely brilliant talk.